words. And Merlyn and I have been beautifully introduced. We're going to share this talk, but we'll bat it backwards and forwards between us in a way, and you'll see how it unfolds. Emma said we're practicing printmakers, and for me, well, I think for both of us, this is an art form on the one hand, but it's also a craft form. So it sits exquisitely between the arts and the crafts. It goes from one to the other in a very interesting way. And it's a very ancient thing. It goes back into the mists of time. I mean, thousands of years, the first evidence of printing. So it's a very, very early form of making a reproducible kind of image. We're going to touch at the beginning a little bit on Japanese printmaking, partly because this is probably the most famous woodcut of all time. It's just about everybody knows it and its thing, but it doesn't detract from how absolutely fantastic it is. And Hokusai had several goes at it. This was about number 5 as far as I can remember. We're not scholars of this form. We've looked at a lot of work over the many years that we've practiced it, but we haven't engaged with it as scholars, so you have to, if you don't mind bearing with us on that. I was going to, we'll flick from this, yes, next one, and Merlyn's going to say a little bit about this particular
This is also
print.
Another very famous, well-known print by Hiroshige. It's called Sudden Shower over Shinshashu Bridge and Otaki, and it's probably his most famous work and part of 100 views of Edo, now Tokyo, in the 1700s. But it's just extraordinary, and it's, I mean, I don't know how, even now I don't know how he would have done the rain. It's unbelievable.
Yeah.
Let's press on.
I wanted to put this slide up because it touches on another aspect of woodblock printing, where in early illustrated books, a lot of them to do with religion or aspects of life, woodcuts were used as the sole means of illustration, where we would now use photographs. So, and especially in southern Germany, there was a big tradition based on book illustration. And the form that woodblock printing takes, I thouut just mention the most extraordinary thing that Merlyn came across. Let's have the next. Yeah, this is Korean. Well, I expect it's. I'm not sure what script it is. I think it's a Chinese script, isn't it?
Well, it's a Korean.
But it's a Korean piece of work. I'll just read what it says here. The Tripitaka Koreana, carved on 81,258 woodblocks in the 13th century, is the most successful large data transfer over time ever achieved by humankind. And here, these are woodblocks, 81,000 of them, and they've survived 700 years. So that's like one polarity of this potential.
Okay.
Let's go on to yeah, lovely.
Okay, so now we get on to more to the present day, and we're going to show you a really varied selection of prints that we love, that we've kind of collected over many years, and particularly put them together for the book that we've just written, which is how we come to be here, because we showed Emma the images, didn't we, back in Heartland. So terribly simple. Chisels and gouges, many different kinds of wood, a roller or a brush, ink and paper. Anybody can do it, you know. And often people's first piece of work is just staggering. And Rod was the person who said, and I've never forgotten it. He said it's the only thing he knows where you can get out more than you put in, which, I mean, and it does feel like that sometimes.
That's
I mean, not
very good,
always,
yeah.
but it continues to be exciting,
It
doesn't
does.
it?
It continues to
and
be
an enormous
exciting.
pleasure.
Yeah, absolutely.
So there's a roller. This is a print by Shiko Munakata that Rod talked about earlier. And in fact, didn't we meet because of Munakata?
Yes, it was. I was walking on the North Devon coast, and I looked through the window of Merlyn's house, which said gallery, so I thought I was allowed to look through the window. And in a corner, I saw a print clearly influenced by Munakata, and I nearly fell over because nobody knows of him, his work. Anyway, Merlyn was sitting outside having a cup of tea, and I said, Munakata's in there, and she said yes. She said there are 3 originals in the village, and I said, what? Because these are extraordinarily valuable now, and they're, you know, he's treated as a great master.
Bernard Leach's grandson lives in our village, my village, and had the originals.
He gave a talk here actually many years ago.
Did he?
Yes.
Wow, incredible. Rod, you talk about this one.
Yeah.
Andrew Davidson.
Well, we're
Edward
just touching on, Merlyn said to me once, the essence of woodblock is black-white, and I think that's right. It's very, you know, the simplicity of it, but the sophistication you can take both from the previous print and from this print, you know, into giving perspective and kind of a visual sophistication that is quite extraordinary within very tight constraints. And it's often the case with the art that the very limitations that one is faced with, and one's faced with plenty of limitations with woodblock, you've got plenty to be going on with in the way of what you can't do, allows a kind of creativity to flow. And Edward Wadsworth, who did this print in about 1917, I wanted it shown because I sort of feel, you know, it's very easy to put people and things on a pedestal, but there is wonderful work coming from England, wonderful work from Germany, wonderful work from many different places in the world, as well as Japan. Of course, that is
and China.
You know, and China. So we're gonna dit about, but try not to put too much pedestals, you know. And this is a very
He
fine
designed
print indeed.
dazzle camouflage for the Royal Navy.
Right.
I discovered when researching for this. This is another wonderful, wonderful German printmaker, Karl-Heinz Kleemann, who you came across, didn't you?
I did, I met him. But what I was really excited about that, and this shows it so beautifully, is that, you know, woodblock can be a very tight medium. It can do very exact things. You can do great perfection. But here, it's treated in the most loose way, like a painting, and with a kind of freedom and a flair that is quite extraordinary for
it's
a
really,
medium.
really difficult to do. And
It's
I remember
really
a
difficult.
colleague of mine, she phoned me up one day and she said, I've done a baby Kleemann.
Yeah.
She was so pleased with herself.
I came across it because I went to his he was in his 90s, so it must have been his last show, I would think, at a gallery in South Germany. And I was blown away. I'd never heard of him, but his book was on sale, and I got a signed copy. But when I got back to England, I showed Merlyn, and she said, wow. And then we've shown this to lots of people, and everybody who sees it goes, wow.
All the students love it, don't they?
Yeah, it's powerful, interesting work.
Yeah. Propaganda poster, 1966 to 1976, something like that. We've had a lot of connection this last year with the Muban Educational Trust, known as MET, and they're in Putney, and you can see their Chinese woodblock prints by appointment, and it's really well worth it. They've chosen some really wonderful work, and this was one that we picked out. Anselm Kiefer, again German. Controversial issues from history, life, death and the cosmos, This one's called The Rhine, 1993, and it's a collage, I think. It's very big, and again, very loose, which is something that I think we both admire.
I think one of the points that came up with this print was a lot of artists who are really, really well known as painters or in other mediums have a kind of sideline in woodblock. And I mean, probably the most famous was Gauguin, who rated his woodcuts his own work very highly in his genre. Although he's known as a painter, he thought of himself also as a printmaker.
There was an exhibition on last year at Dulwich Picture Gallery of this woman, Helen Frankenthaler, married to Robert Motherwell, and it's big and incredibly imposing, and I gather was made from about 20 blocks. I mean, it's hard to know how, but just layer after layer of subtle colours building up this extraordinary, mesmerising piece. So we go on now. Oh, okay, right. Well, we're going to just say a little bit about how we came into printmaking and our stories, really. This is a picture of me sitting on a wall in the north of China in 1979, and it was just the early days where foreigners were allowed to go into China, and the crowds, the interest, it was quite difficult sometimes to actually, I was there to illustrate a book, and it was quite difficult because the crowds would be so intense that I couldn't actually see what I was looking at, and the police would come and wonder what was going on, and then they'd say, you know, she's trying to draw that temple, and they'd make this little narrow gap so I could see the temple, and then I'd look over there and the whole crowd would shuffle around so I could see over there, and I mean it was a most extraordinary visit.
They were so fascinated by you.
Oh, absolutely.
Right, and that's all back then, is it?
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. They thought I was a Uyghur, actually.
A week ago?
Yeah,
Interesting.
because I had green eyes and didn't have black hair. So they would speak to me in Chinese, and of course I didn't understand. But I was up on the Mongolian border, and this is how I came to want to do woodcuts. I saw these beautiful woodcuts in place of glass in the buildings up there. They're cheaper than glass, and they were replaced every new year. And I just thought, I just want to do those. I was a painter before, I did painting at college, but I just saw those and I thought, that's what I want to do. And I mean, it took me a long time to get to it, to find a teacher, but as soon as I did, which was 20 years later, I never did another painting or another anything. I just have done woodcuts, so that was lucky. A temple in Hong Kong. I quite often, I mean, I work on an emotional level. If I see something that means a lot to me, then it sticks in my mind for a while until I can get to make a woodcut of it. So this was a deserted temple in Hong Kong, a place called Shallow Tong, and so atmospheric. And then that was a print that came out of it, just a very small 10 by 10 centimetres mini print. Influenced by the sea, always in the sea, and there's a print
Merlyn
from it.
swims with a block and a wax crayon, swims out to sea and does drawings of rocks while treading water. Yeah, it's absolutely amazing.
That is a woodcut, so you can have woodcuts with soft edges, and it's just a question of how to grade the colour. I think we're on to you, Rod.
No, you've got one more,
Oh,
I
okay.
hope.
Okay.
There we are.
All right, there's another one. Equinox sunset, swimming out on the October equinox through those rocks, which is where I swim to a lot. And it was just one of the most beautiful moments of my life. And I just went on and swimming out and out and out. And I thought, I don't actually care if I never come back. You know, it's just the most beautiful place I've ever been. The sun was actually setting between those two rocks, but I thought it would be a bit cheesy to put it in the print, so I left it out. But
Is it Scotland?
it is Heartland, yeah. Here we are.
Yeah, I was going to talk a little bit, this is a slight journey back into prosaic here, but about my sort of early encounters with printmaking. I'd never even really thought of doing it, but I lived in London doing my A-levels. I was a mature student, I suppose I was about 20 years old, and we had amazingly, we had a big printing press in the basement of our house. And my adopted father was a keen and very, very accomplished amateur printer. And he produced poetry and monograms and stories. He was actually a professional musician. And he wanted to publish the stories that he'd had from his musical life. And he knew that because I'd always drawn, he asked me to do little monographs for books and things, and I didn't really know how to do it, and I just cut that in lino. That was the kind of typical small works. These would be just 3 inches by 3 inches, if that. And I did quite a lot of these small fleurons and little bits for his, to go along with his printing, and that started me off on making woodcuts. And I think the first time I ever kind of tried to engage with art, if you like, was thinking of myself as a fool, and I kind of did this. I've always liked this. This was me, kind of an expression of a sort of deep loneliness that I felt at that time, and just this is the fool looking at the moon, and it was a kind of self-portrait of my state of mind at that time. Again, it's tiny. I'd also get pulled in to do the family Christmas card. This is that sort of thing which I expect everybody to get. So this was one of my Christmas cards, which I'm actually really proud of. It was inspired by the wonderful sculptor called Giselbertus of Autun, who's, I don't know whether you've ever come across his work, but he's wild and wonderful. This is really, actually this is my second ever woodcut. I had a sort of, I had a real revelation when I went to London in 1994, and I think it was early in the year, and I had a hangover, and we were visiting an exhibition by Munch, and this hangover and the Munch, and it was just like, I thought, oh my God, I'm going to be ill. And then I remember upstairs was an exhibition by Shiko Munakata, who I'd never heard of. So I kind of staggered in this terrible state upstairs, and it was like a sort of religious experience for me. I never come across work that was so fantastic. It was so fresh and free, and it cured me instantly of my hangover, and I've never really got over his work since. It was hugely influential on me, more than I think any other artist, and I wanted to work fast and free and in a different way. So I was a carpenter at the time, and I knew how to use tools, and I knew about wood. So I got some wood, I got some maple. I didn't know which wood, I didn't really know which tools. And I carved this in Munakata's technique, very fast, very free, and it's called Foxes and Thorns in the Moonlight. And then subsequently, I worked on very influenced by Munakata for many years, and I felt I had to kind of find my own style, and it was very, very difficult for me to find a style that was authentically mine. I think it probably only took me about 32 or 33 years of persisting with things that I was copying this and copying that and bringing in different influences. But anyway, I did find a kind of style which I feel is authentically mine, and I just thought I would show one print from this kind of style I work in now, so you can see the evolution of it. I think that's my... okay, so we have the next one.
Oh, okay.
Okay.
Me.
Yeah.
Right. So we thought we would talk a bit about our influences what influenced us to do what we do. And I mean, I found it quite difficult to think, you know, when it's looking at somebody else, it's quite easy to say, well, they look as if they're influenced by that. But when it's yourself, it's not so easy. But I chose this print because I grew up in a scientific family. My father was professor of physics in Hong Kong. My son's a associate professor of physics. And I have enormous belief in, you know, the importance of science, and I could never let it go. So when I look at something like that, even though it moves me emotionally, I have to know that I got it right, you know, that the water really does that. So there's still a big influence of my father there, that, you know, I need to know the distance between the rollers and the, you know, and how the angle of the glitter path would be between those rocks and so on. So so that's why I put that slide in. And then this is a funny one. This is me when I was about 7, and my mum was an artist and she had exquisite taste. I've got a friend here who will remember my mum, just one. And so she would dress me mostly in grey, but sometimes in brown. And I think, God, you know, I still wear those colours. I can't wear blue or green or purple or anything. I still wear beige and black and grey and brown, and it's a question of taste, and taste is such a funny thing, isn't it? I notice with students, they nearly always print in the colours they're wearing, maybe 80% of the time. You know, there's some people who love to do blue and green prints, and then you see them wearing, you know, blue apron and green trousers, and it seems to happen so much. And maybe it doesn't happen in your field, I don't know, but certainly in this kind of work I've noticed it a lot, so that's why I put that picture in. And again, this is by a French woman, Fabienne Verdier, and it's not a woodcut, it's a painting. She went to China and she was determined to learn calligraphy, and the calligrapher said, no, I don't want Westerners, not serious people. And she said, but I am serious, I really am serious. And she stayed there and she sat on his doorstep until he said, oh, okay, but if you come, you stay 10 years. And she said, yeah, okay, I'll stay 10 years. And she did. And so, although it's not a woodcut, it's so exquisite that I thought it is an influence on me. And this is one of my favourite painters. This is actually a print, but Howard Hodgkin was predominantly a painter. I met him a few times when I was at college. I've always loved his work. A lot of influence, certainly in his early work, from Indian miniatures. Mainly, I think, with the richness of colour. So although I don't use very strong colours, I love his work and I'm influenced by it in some way, I hope. I think that's it, Rod, for me.
Forward on.
There we are.
Yeah, I'll just say a few words about these. These were in that exhibition that I saw in London, and it was a series of, I think, 12 woodcuts. And the amazing thing about them is that they were life-size. These were actually as high as I am, nearly 6 foot high, I would think. And I thought, wow, this is an amazing medium. You can work at any scale, and you can get this kind of sense of vivacity that is hard to get in any other way. Very, very, even painters or calligraphers would have trouble getting images of that kind of vivacity.
And because he had tunnel vision,
yes,
often he would work in one corner,
that's right.
and he'd get to the top and he'd think, whoops, not enough room for the head, and
he was
squeeze
quite,
it in.
He was quite eccentric. Apparently, he also used to work naked because he felt there should be nothing between him and the block.
With just a
You know,
sweatband.
so it was kind of like
sweatband.
he was kind of quite just a band around his head.
Yeah.
And then many years later in Germany, I'm going to just talk a little bit about my relationship with Germany because I've seen some wonderful woodcut work. This was by a printmaker who's not known in this country, but he's quite well known in South Germany, called H.A.P. Grieshaber. And these were also life-size figures. And I thought this is a wonderful contrast with the Woodcutter. They've likewise got a kind of sense of a great sense of presence that I related to. And another quality that Grieshaber had that I relate to in all sorts of work is humour. And humour is a very, very slippery beast in terms artistically. It's sort of like a high-risk strategy. But Grieshaber seemed to be not afraid of it, and he would do charming figures, affection and humour, and it was I loved the freedom of that kind of work, and I definitely found it influential. And then we're going from this quite light theme into something very dark, really, and this was another German printmaker called Kathy Kollwitz, who was absolutely shattered by the experience of the First World War and the loss of her son in that war, and did a series of woodcuts that for me are influential because they show the power of the medium. I mean, they show all sorts of things, but it's hard to imagine a sense of grief beating that in this particular way of cutting. Her work is very, very strong. And now we're back to Kleeman, who I'd said before, I'd met him at his final exhibition, and this is just, I mean, if you like, one thing chosen at random, but wonderful effects of perspective and reflection and all kinds of, a kind of vocabulary of printmaking, which is one of the things that we've written about actually in both of our books, about how when you work with this medium, you develop a vocabulary almost as distinctive as a handwriting. Mm-hmm. And the development of that is not totally conscious. It kind of happens through repeated experience. So I think we'll move on. Okay, I know what this is going to be. This is a discontinuity now, because we're jumping to the book that we've just written. And we thought we'd say a few words about it. We're both teachers of woodblock, and actually Merlyn taught me how to teach, really. I just watched Merlyn for a bit and I thought, might be able to do that. And I love teaching, actually. I really enjoy it. It's occasionally frustrating, but it's interesting. And I found I think both did over the years, that you see a student working and think, have you thought of this? Have you thought of doing that? Or and they say, how? And then you just show them a little bit of how to do it, and then they do it, and wow, that's amazing. So we wanted to write a book about how to do it. And I come across this book by chance about rhetoric. And I know it sounds completely off the beam, but rhetoric was the ancient Greek art of persuasion. It was how to turn a crowd to believe in what you were saying. And there were a series of maybe, let's say, 50 or 60 verbal tricks that you could use in order to persuade people, in order to change their minds. And this was a very powerful part of ancient Greek culture, and it's a powerful part of our culture now. Anyway, this book, which is hilarious, and I'd strongly recommend it, is a very good introduction to it. And as I read it, I thought, I wonder if we can find a visual equivalent of rhetoric, i.e. a series of tricks that you learn by rote that actually can make a print good.
I think tricks is the wrong word, actually.
I think it might be, yes.
Tricks.
Well,
it's a negative thing, tricks.
They're
concepts.
Concepts, yeah, right. So we turned, that's Merlyn's getting it right. We turned this into our book, which is called 20 Concepts in Woodblock Print. And it's a kind of, have you thought of this sort of book with 20 ideas that people might apply to their own work?
So then, 20 concepts, we've picked out about 10 or so of them, and one illustration to go with each concept. So we'll just whiz through them. This is by Emma Stibben, who's an English artist, just recently become a Royal Academician, and we've put that in authenticity. This is one of mine, balance.
And that means black and white, the balance of black and white, which is a real essence of woodblock printmaking. This is border and boundaries. This is one of my Christmas cards, but it's just like some hens within a boundary, and it's about how you can hold a picture together with an artificial
print. Rod
boundary.
works so fast. You know, the steam comes out.
I
of
do
his
work fast.
head.
I like to work fast.
This is a beautiful woodcut by Nana Shiomi, who's a Japanese printmaker living in London. And she's very prolific, and they're all... She's done a lot of vessels, and they nearly all have a sort of tatami floor.
And a lovely use of the grain of the wood in
Yeah.
the background of that. She really has got a wonderful,
and
wonderful
rich
feel.
colour too.
Yeah.
Chen Haiyan is a Chinese printmaker, and
This is humour.
What's it called actually? It's called Meeting Their Mates.
I think she must be she must have a great sense of humour, this
She's
woman.
very famous. We felt really happy to get copyright permission to use her image. And they have flowers in their hair. I think it's lovely.
Yeah.
What was the trait for the previous image? I didn't catch that.
For the
I'm sorry.
composition.
Yes, composition.
Yes.
Yes, and then, I forgot to say that. And this is humour. And then, motif. Sarah Burns makes block printed fabrics based in Brighton. Beautiful work. This is Rod's, and this is in the section on perspective. It's down on North Devon. Chen Yuping, very well-known Chinese printmaker who I met when I was working there. I mean, I don't know how relevant these stories are, but he didn't speak any English and I didn't speak any Mandarin, and we were sitting under a tree having a beer one evening, and he said, "Ashmolean." And I said, "Pardon, say again." "Ashmolean." I said, "Ashmolean?" He said, "Ashmolean, number one." And it turned out he'd been invited, he'd won a prize, and he'd been invited over to have an exhibition in Oxford. So that was wonderful. Okay, why has it gone small? Oh, well, it is small. This is actually the cover of our book, and it's by Ying Tiang.
It's a shame it's so small. What happened
I
there?
don't know. Anyway,
Is it?
not to worry. No, don't muck it up, Rod.
No, okay.
Sorry, the truth comes out now.
No,
Yeah,
it's
sorry,
such
we'll
a
move
shame,
on.
'cause it's
But
such
it's
a
a
beautiful
beautiful print, and we like it because of its kind of woody quality and its abstractness, and just that it's exquisite in real life, as is this one by Professor Wang Chao. It may not be that easy to see. I think every mark is considered. It's two people in the bath, actually, but
we had that as under tradition.
yes,
It's very
traditional
kind of got a
and
very
symbolisms.
old
Yeah.
feeling about it.
Okay. We're over to you now.
Okay. I've completely forgotten what I'm going to
It's
say.
this section about digital,
Uh-huh.
the digital world,
Okay.
and
Yes, this is an interesting area that I find it interesting, and it's kind of it might be a touch controversial, but it's the relationship between the ancient traditional crafts of woodblock printmaking and digital technology. And for myself, my personal thing is that I use two programs in particular. I use Procreate on an iPad, and I use Photoshop. And I use these not to make images for final creation, but I use them as signposts for how to work, because cutting a woodblock is quite a laborious process in some ways. It's quite slow. And each cut you make in a block is committing. You can't rub out, so you can only go in one direction. And it's incredibly useful for me to have a signpost to know that my chances of going in the right direction are based on good decisions. Because if you go in the wrong direction, you have to throw the block away. And so I use particularly Procreate as a signpost for directing, because I can photograph what I'm doing, put it in there, and just check that I'm heading in the right, heading in a direction that I want to go in. So it can save me quite a lot of time. And I wanted to run through. Merlyn and I are kind of planning. This is absolutely current and live now. We're planning to do some very large woodcuts, and based on the North Devon coast. I mean, these will be. Our hope is these will be prints 8 foot by 4 foot woodcuts, really large. And I mocked up different aspects of our work on the computer, and you can see I just use these as thinking processes. I'm not going to talk about these in great detail, but I can, by working backwards and forwards between the block and my the block and our concept of what it's going to be, I can mock up print. This I wrote. This is just an actual photo of my iPad. Thinking about, just go back a little bit. I just want to say a little bit. You can see that's not a woodblock print, but I'm mocking up to see whether I can actually produce an image like that in woodcut. So I've got to think, when I get something like that, I think, can I actually print that? Can I actually print that? Because I know, and this is an important point for me, that if I can print it, it's always going to look better than the digital equivalent. So I don't feel a slave of it. I feel it's just another tool that I use. This is one I wanted to show, just that for reproduction purposes, digital frees us from the constraints of scale. We can go from small to very large.
Okay.
There's just one other point, if that's okay. I've touched on digital image manipulation. I've touched on digital reproduction. And there's a third point that I think that anybody working in the arts who wants to make a living out of what they do, and that's digital sales and marketing. We need to now, with the world being what it is, we need to have websites, we need to have an Instagram profile, we need to have a kind of, well, maybe we don't, but I think that my hunch is that we do, and it's going to be increasing that we need to have a digital presence in the world. But, maybe that's controversial, but anyway, there we are. I think leave it at that.
So the next section is excellence. And I've chosen this image, which was a photo I took of a woodcut at the sweet-scented Osmanthus Primary School in Guanlan, just over the border from Hong Kong in China. Start them early. There's, they're young kids, and here probably you'd say, oh, sorry, tools are dangerous, sharp tools are dangerous, it's health and safety. But there they were 7- or 8-year-olds chopping away with their chisels and gouges. And I just thought that was such a beautiful, beautiful print. I spent a couple of weeks, interestingly, at the Purple Bamboo Studio, again in Guangzhou, and in Hangzhou, I'm sorry. And I was just shocked by the fact that a small group of us got an Arts Council grant to go for 2 weeks, and our fellow students, because it was a new intake, were there for 4 years. So we were a bit of a joke, really, we'd just gone for 2 weeks. Of course, for us it was wonderful and we learnt an enormous amount. But for them it was just like these people come and go, and then we get down to the serious work. And what these students had to do was choose from the library a watercolour painting and copy it in woodcut for as many years as it took until it was perfect, a perfect reproduction. And once they could do that, then they were free to use their imagination and do what they wanted. But they absolutely had to understand the technique utterly before they were allowed to do it.
How many years did it normally take?
About 2 years. Yeah,
One
but
painting?
you know, yeah, I mean, and you know, it was things I'd never even considered. They had little blowers on their table with humidity, so there was just exactly the right amount of moisture in the air around their desk. We never think of that, you know. It was, and also when we got there, 3 of us, they said, "Okay, we know you're no good at cutting, so you draw a geometric design, and then you cut it, and you cut it until you cut it perfectly." But we're aware you only have 2 weeks, so you know, just some days. Anyway, so for 1 week, we cut these shapes so we could get perfect right angles, perfect angles. Those things mattered. And then after that, you know, if you don't want perfect angles, you don't have to do it, but at least you know how. So I thought that was really valuable. And then this was also in Hangzhou. I just thought it was quite interesting that Hangzhou Lake is a man-made lake, and it was built for beauty, and it was built for people to come for their holidays and experience beauty, and they came in their thousands. So, just the proportions are very, very beautiful, very peaceful. There's just a woodcut, and I'm afraid I don't know who did it. Lost in the mists of time, but it's a print of one of those bridges in Hangzhou. And then a couple more. That's again the lake, and I interpreted it in my own way, using the method of cutting that I'd learnt in China, where you can get very thin lines. You know, they're not perfect, but maybe in this case they don't have to be perfect because they're willows hanging. But and this is an interesting print. It's by a very well-known Chinese printmaker called Dai Da Quan, who his father was on the Long March, and he did this print. One of the portraits is his father, and all the people in this image are real people, the portraits of real people. And it took him 4 years, and he only made 4 copies, and they weren't allowed to leave China for some reason.
And I
Anyway.
took that photograph. It was amazing.
But,
place.
you know, he was a professor of printmaking, quite young, and he was given the opportunity to have that much time to work. And I just feel that in our distracted world, it's quite rare for people to have that much time, but I think it's necessary.
We go from sublime to ridiculous now,
Okay,
I think.
it's on to you now. Ta-da!
I said ridiculous. I was just going to say a few words about why we think this medium is still relevant. So this is like touching on different ways in which woodblock might impact on the real world. And I just thought I'd start off with a kind of quite shocking poster. Actually, it was cut by a student of ours at West Dean. We did
5 minutes.
Well, that's all
You've
right.
got
We'll
5
be.
minutes,
Well,
yeah.
that's perfect.
Yeah.
So posters. You know, in revolutionary China, posters are woodcuts, and even now, woodcut is a wonderful medium for posters. It's so impactful and hot off the press.
She was a doctor, wasn't she?
She was a doctor. Yeah. She was quite shocking, wasn't she, as well?
Good fun.
She was great fun. Yeah. This is by an artist who I knew in South Germany, who's a wonderful free worker in woodcut, but also a printer of fine books of an extremely high standard. And this is an illustration from one of his books. You can see his typography was absolutely exquisite, and his illustrations that were very free went with this great discipline. And this touched on something that's very important to me in my own work, which is a sense of freedom within a disciplined framework. And Eckhart's work just seemed to me to sum that up, and I wanted to show that. He prints for 10 months of the year, and then 2 months of the year he goes over to the States and he does book fairs in the States and sells his fantastic work to American universities who lap it up. I wanted to show this as a kind of example of students who've never done woodblock before, the kind of work, the standard that's possible and that is always amazing to me that students produce. This woman had never done a woodblock print before, I don't think, and came up with that industrial landscape.
Fabulous.
It's absolutely fantastic. So you don't, I mean, in Hangzhou, you'd work for 4 years to perfect the skills, but in 2 days this woman did this.
It's
what
not
do you say?
unusual. It's not unusual.
Not unusual.
Beautiful work in their first week.
It's stunning, isn't it?
Yeah.
It is.
Yeah.
It's really awesome. And and actually, one of the nice things of teaching, you see something like that, and I feel, well, what's not to learn about that? I've got to, as a teacher, to drink in that and see what she's done. It is fantastic. This again, this is recent. This photo was taken a week ago down in South Devon, and I teach at Salcombe Art Club, of which I'm a proud member. Delia, she's in her 80s, and she did this woodcut, a large woodcut, this by that, of a farm where she grew up. And this is the life of the farm. And she's produced this kind of commentary on her past. So it's like an autobiographical sketch, and I wanted to show it because I thought it was such a marvellous...
She was pleased with it.
She was thrilled to bits. Yeah, she was completely bowled over. She had these wonderful things, and she could then give her autobiography to her family and her grandchildren and those. You're now, Merlyn.
There's just 3 images left. This is by a student of mine because she came over from Vermont to try and learn a bit more about water, and I mean she's taught me a thing or two with this print. It's just beautiful, I think. Janet Cathy from Randolph, Vermont. I think it's gorgeous.
Stunning piece of work.
And then we found this for our book from the Imperial War Museum. Paul Nash, do you want to say anything about it?
We kind of... it's hard to know what to say. I think it more or less speaks for itself that there's a kind of... there's an immediacy and a vivacity that is possible in woodcut that shows horror and emotion in a very strong way. And Paul Nash's kind of encapsulation of the Western Front in that single print just about says it all about how, how powerful, it says a lot about how powerful this medium is potentially, and so we wanted to show it. We go on to one last image.
Finally.
Yeah, Merlyn and I saw this print, and in this reproduction is less than a quarter the size of the actual print. It's huge.
About 10 foot high.
Yeah.
By Chen Qi in Shanghai, who's done a whole series of prints of water of this calibre.
It's made him very famous now. And I mean, he's a very successful, sought-after artist, and absolutely right too, because this work is sublime. It's hard to it's hard to overstate how good his work is. I just wanted to finish up before we have opened the floor up for questions with one quotation, which may be relevant to this place that we're in. It isn't as though one needs to be a scholar in order to appreciate tradition. It's enough to know that tradition is there, should you wish to delve into it. And if you do, you may find your work enlivened and enriched by the wisdom of the ages and those who've been before. Those of us who take trouble to tend the flame of tradition stand to be warmed by it. And those who consider tradition as simply ash of the past, they will miss out. So I think we'll end it on that. Thank you.